Lovely. Okay. Well, good evening, everyone, and happy Halloween. I feel very honored to have been given this slot. But for some of us, every night is Halloween because we're really interested in the presence of the memory of the dead. And it takes some of us aback when we just see this eruption of the imagery of mortality on this one night of the year. For some of us, it's a regular occurrence. And I was thinking about this last night, very late last night, as I went for a late walk around the neighborhood. And on the left, you can see a rather flamboyant pair of spooky shrouds, screaming and angry spirits. And I thought, that's the 21st century interpretation of Halloween. It's kind of Fright Night. And have a look on the right, you can actually see another pair of shrouded figures. These are alabaster standing effigies arising out of their urns at the sounding of the last trump. They're resurrecting figures, Sir Geoffrey and Lady Margaret Palmer at East Carlton in Northamptonshire, cut by Joshua Marshall. So today we think of death as terrifying, spooky. We really embrace it as a sort of shocking thing and then put it out of our mind for the rest of the year. But for the 17th century, living with death was a daily, hourly reality. And people went to very great lengths to present themselves as embracing the concepts of death. So to our modern eyes, some of the monuments we find from the 17th century look peculiarly grisly and death obsessed. But for the Christian in the 17th century, belief in the life to come was really important. And reminders of death were important tools in the arsenal of the Christian, the God-fearing Christian, who sometimes used their funerary monuments as ways to hand over this message, remembering about the inevitability of death and thinking of the longer term. So what I want to do today is to have a top 10 of monuments of the macabre variety and talk a bit about what they were trying to achieve, why they appeal to me, and above all, share some images of what I think are interesting things with like-minded people. So it's very nice to be in everyone's company. Thanks awfully for joining. And I should say, before getting stuck into Lady Wentworth at Bath, for me, the true terror of death is annihilation and oblivion. Being forgotten is the nothingness that comes after death. Seeing the visual imagery of death and decay as presented to us from the 17th century, I find curiously life-affirming. There's an irony there. We could talk about it later. Right, so my top 10 of macabre tombs. And these all date from the Stuart period. There's one Georgian interloper, however. So number 10 is at Bath Abbey, Mary Lady Wentworth, who died in 1706. This is an absolutely beautiful monument in the south transept of the Abbey, one of the hundreds of monuments that are inside Bath Abbey, that are these poignant testaments to the sheer numbers of people who travel to Bath in search for cure and instead found death. This monument might well be by the mason Edward Stanton. We know Stanton's father, William, did a monument to Mary's father, Viscount Lonsdale at Lowther, up in the northwest. And this, I think, is an exquisite monument showing a elegant, smart, yet interestingly décolleté woman, a very soft portrait of her, with her lace frontage undone, her hair falling down one side of her neck, her headpiece tumbling down the other shoulder. It's an interestingly casual and engaging portrait that really stresses her slight plumpness and very much a physical presence of this woman. But oh dear, look below, look beside the feet of the cherubs who hold her likeness up. So she was 30 when she died. and had married John Wentworth, an enormously wealthy landowner in the West Riding of Yorkshire, who was created a baronet shortly after they got married. There she is again. This is looking at her portrait rather closer to, but on the right, you can see what I think must be used as the source. It's this splendid portrait by Gottfried Schalken, the Dutch painter, well known for his sort of candlelit scenes. Here she is, the most glamorous figure of late Stuart life. There are exotic fruits. She's holding a peach. There are grapes, just the exquisite fruits of the hothouse, the smartest things you can imagine. There's a parrot there and this splendid landscape behind. It's a lovely portrait, and that's now at Bridlington in Sowerby Hall. And I would say it's pretty likely that this was used as a prompt for the sculpted portrait. It looks pretty similar to me. But look at the ground below. You can see a skull, the jaw is loose and teeth have fallen out of it. There's a fibia sticking out of the ground, and a flower, a bloom, which is a reminder of the fragility of beauty. It's a devastating scene, and I find this an enormously moving tomb, one of my favorites in the Abbey. And it reminds me of another tomb from that period. This is to a very interesting woman, Lady Henrietta Maria Wentworth, no relation. And she is known to history perhaps best as the mistress and confidant and very, very close and intense lover of the Duke of Monmouth, who of course was executed in 1685. She died in the year after. Some said of grief, her detractors said through excessive painting of her face with mercury-based whitening powder. The monument is slightly damaged. It's at Toddington in Bedfordshire. And this was raised by her mother, who was clearly grief-stricken. And we can see this relief between the two figures, this relief of bodily annihilation. You can see 3 skulls, an array of bones, a loose jaw, some spumes of earth and some foliage scattered across. This is a devastating scene. And it really makes you think about the process of grieving that went into the erection of this tomb to stress the annihilation of the body, the utter disappearance of beauty. It's a terribly sad and heavy monument. And I think the Bath one that I think is number 10 in my pecking order is very much in this spirit. So that was number 10. Oh, another one, sorry. That idea of death emerging from the ground. Whenever you walk in a churchyard, you will be aware of the presence of the remains of the dead. Here we see this really touching Baroque tomb, probably by William Stanton, to the young Richard Shireburn, a boy, an heir who died, and that was the end of one particular line. And here you see him starting, his arms outstretched in alarm as he looks down on the ground. And what does he see? A death's head with these ominous, rather spooky, bony hands almost pulling themselves out of the earth to come and remind the boy of the imminence of death. It's a very, very strange monument, stylistically very smart and au courant, but the message is a very old-fashioned and stern one. Again, what was going through the people commissioning these monuments' minds really makes you think. Okay, number 9. This is a headstone in the graveyard at Harmondsworth Church in Middlesex, which is just to the north of Heathrow Airport. So she gets woken up regularly by flights. And I've chosen a tombstone because I think it's really important that we remember the outdoor monuments as well as the indoor ones. There is so much discovery, so much pleasure to be derived from exploring churchyards. And this one really hit me between the eyes when I saw it. It's a Portland stone headstone. She died in 1741 Mrs. Anne Davy, wife of Mr. John Davy and daughter of Richard Falconer. She was blessed with such a disposition and temper of I can't quite read it here, but it's a really gushy epitaph telling us how wonderful she was. But the point of showing it to you is the bleak center stage depiction of a death's head, shown here in profile. The architectural surround is a very elegant affair, influenced by James Gibbs's Book of Architecture that had been published in 1728. So the mason was very up to date in his sources, but he was asked to put a skull in the centerpiece, where in Gibbs's designs there are normally relief portraits. So imagine depicting your wife as a skull, just like that. This isn't a tombstone seeking to give consolation to the mourner. It's a very bleak frontal assault on memory, and it's using the tombstone as a sermon, if you will, to remember the inevitability of death. But the palms, the palm fronds that flank below the skull, of course, they are allegories of victory over death. They remind us of Christ's entry into Jerusalem and ultimately the resurrection. So there's a note of Christian consolation here, but it's a very stark, rather bleak portrayal of death. And there are quite a few tombstones of this period to youngish women. It seems a sort of memorial particularly given to wives, oddly enough, which I find really intriguing. I'd like to know more about that, spend some more time studying it. When you're in the churchyard, you will see that her tomb is next door to her father's tomb. There is Richard Falconer on the right, late of this parish, yeoman, who died in 1732. And whereas poor Anne Davy gets a very dour, gloomy, mortal portrait, you can see that Richard Falconer has a much more jolly, upbeat array of images. He has the bliss-filling cherubim, the trumpet that's going to sound the last trump. There is a torch, admittedly, that talks about the extinction of life, but this is much more optimistic. So you can see that that was the optimistic, forward-looking one, and Davies, rather more dour. So that was number 9, and I put that in really as a tribute to the art of the churchyard. These are some more death's heads from the same churchyard at Harmondsworth. You can see on the right 2 very enjoyable, rather jocular death's heads to members of the Pig family, Joseph and Sarah Pig, husband and wife of the 1730s. And over on the left, the bigger picture shows a trio of skulls with one set of crossbones, Sarah Chantrelle. So splendid things to be found inside the churchyard. Number 8, and my thanks go to Jean Wilson and Norman Hammond for some of the images here, including this one. This is a very, very strange affair indeed, at Churchill in Somerset. There's the church outside. I put some maps in just to show where these places are. I thought you were probably okay about London and Bath, but just so people who perhaps aren't even in England, and it is, by the way, lovely to have people tuning in from elsewhere in the world, just to give a clue as to where these places are. And the more exploring you can do to seek these things out, the better. So, Churchill, Somerset, John and Sarah Latch. There it is. You can see that it's a very conventional early 17th century edicular monument with Ionic columns flanking the backplate, heraldic achievement on top, a semi-reclining effigy of a man in strong top boots with a sword. And this was put up probably during the English Civil War. So there's trouble in the world going on then. And here we see a rather military depiction of John Latch. You can see the fruits of their union below with the kneelers underneath. But stage center is this strange chrysalis-like form. It's the shrouded body of Sarah Latch. Now, monuments, one of the reasons they're so brilliant is that they're combinations of image, of symbol, of architectural form, but also with words, with meaning. And these two reinforce each other. And some of the 17th century is perhaps the greatest century for epitaphs. And here we see one that is, well, it probably wouldn't make it into the Penguin Book of Metaphysical Verse, but it is very touching. I'll just read the beginning of it. Living and dead, thou seest how here we lie. I dote on death, preparing how to die. Ah, fleeting life, she's gone. Age summons me unto the grave, and so will posterity. Though singling death, ye sacred not undo, by parting two made one, once more in two, which is a poignant way of talking about death as the end of a marriage, of a union. And so we're not given a portrait of Sarah Latch, we're given her dead shrouded form, which is quite a heavy thing to do. And when you go up close, you can see that John Latch is actually opening up the shroud for a last look at the dead face of Sarah, which is enormously touching. And we are being admitted into this final act of leave-taking. And that is how the two Latches forevermore are depicted to the world, in this private act of having a last look at Sarah's face. It's enormously touching. Shrouds, of course, there are lots and lots of shroud tombs. It's a medieval concept that survives the Reformation. On the left, we see a shrouded figure at the point of resurrection, Edward Rodney at Rodney Stoke, not so very far from Churchill. And I'm sure if we did some work into the Masons busy in the area at that time, perhaps there might even have been an overlap of people involved. That's a provincial version of a monument form made famous 20 years earlier by the Christmas workshop. And over on the right, you see a pair of shrouded bodies of alabaster at Fenny Bentley in Derbyshire to the Beresford family. And there are lots of incised shrouds around the bottom. That is a quite remarkable monument. But I wanted to stick with Sarah and John Latch's tomb as my offering for the Macabre Monument Top 10, really because of the poignancy of that leave-taking. Terribly sad. Right, number 7, William Urquhart of Bray Langwell in Scotland. Forgive pronunciation. This is a monument in a splendid place called Kirk Michael, which is just at the edge of the Black Isle, northeast of Inverness, in Rossshire, looking onto the Cromarty Firth. And there we see the Cromarty Firth. There we see the chapel at Kirk Michael. This is a heroic achievement, and anyone up in that area, I really urge you to go and visit here, because it's an exemplary project of rescuing a chapel that had become roofless and rather abandoned. It's been re-roofed. The interpretation inside the chapel is outstanding. I don't think I've ever seen such interesting, learned and insightful interpretation panels. It's absolutely to be applauded what's happened at Kirk Michael. And this is a long way up in Scotland. You can see on the map, you know, we are very much in North Scotland up there. And the Scottish tradition of post-Reformation monuments is wonderful. So I wanted to include at least a representative of that. Scottish kirkyards have great treasures to be seen, and sometimes interior monuments too, although they are less numerous than in England. This is the one I've chosen. This is William Urquhart of Bray Langwell, who died in 1708, aged 48, so not too bad an innings. And you can see that this has got 2 layers of the imagery of mortality. At the base, we have the crossed fibulas, thigh bones, flanking a almost saucy looking skull who's balancing an hourglass on his or her head. At the top, in the frieze between the angelic heads, which of course are a happy and uplifting prospect about life to come, we have this anatomically exposed and laid out skeleton. And above, the trumping angels, reminding us that the skeletal state is not going to be the state the Christian will remain in forever. So again, there's an element of optimism despite the grisliness of this monument, which has been executed in sandstone. And this was outside for quite a long time, exposed to the elements. So you can see on the skeletal side, a lot of erosion, but nonetheless, there it is, laid out with surgical precision, a complete skeleton, as though the earth and the coffin has been removed, and we're glimpsing the future state of William Urquhart. The inscription again reinforces this message about looking forward. It recites a number of biblical verses which should fill us with optimism. To me, to live is Christ, and to die is gain. Blessed are the dead which die in the Lord. Thy dead men shall live together, with my dead body shall they arise. Awake and sing, ye that dwell in dust. Surely, and I can't read that one because the sandstone's fallen away. But you see, there are good messages for the Christian there. And that's what enabled these people to depict death so frankly. Death is a temporary state. Here lies the dust of William Urquhart. And yet there is such interest and pleasure to be had from these things. Number 6, this is the grandest of the monuments we're going to be looking at. This is an aristocratic monument at Enza, which is the estate village outside Chatsworth on the edge of the Peak District. So Chatsworth, one of the greatest aristocratic seats in the country, where the Dukes of Devonshire have lived since the 17th century. Here we see the rebuilt church done by George Gilbert Scott in the middle of the 19th century. But it's inside that church that one of the most magnificent tombs that features mortality is to be found. And again, my thanks to Adam White, as well as Norman Hammond for the images. Here we see this magnificent tomb of alabaster, possibly by William Wright. That's the attribution in the revised Pevsner volume from Geoffrey Fisher. It's a very impressive monument with some stuff about status, with some stuff about the world to come, with some good news, but there's also a whole lot of death and decay in this monument as well. The monument is to two brothers who were, whoops, I've misordered these. Let's look at the brothers. These were two children of the mighty Bess of Hardwick and Sir William Cavendish, one of her husbands, and Henry, the older one, died first. So he was not the man who was to begin the title of the Earls of Devonshire. It was his younger brother, William, who was the first holder of that title. Henry Cavendish, I regret to inform you, was known as the Common Bull of Derbyshire and Staffordshire because of his desire for coupling. William Cavendish looks like a slightly more elegant figure, but let's talk about the achievements of Henry Cavendish. Over on the left, you can see a figure of Mars raising a sword in his right hand, a rather uncomfortable raising of a sword, it should be said, but you can see hanging up on the arch to Mars's right, a very smart suit of armor. And Henry Cavendish's finest hour was probably during the wars in the Netherlands against the Spanish forces. He commanded a force at the Battle of Rheimenum in 1578. against Don Juan of Spain and his Spanish troops. So this was Henry's most valiant hour, and you can see that the imagery is essentially that of martial valor. With he's taken off his armor now, but there he is, a combatant. Over on the right, you can see Minerva. Mars and Minerva commonly paired, grouping, and she embodying wisdom, governance, because William was an earl. You can see the earl's robes of state, his coronet above, with his sword prominently displayed there. And you can see various stars above them. This is, and the heads of cherubim. And there's also, you can see an angel blowing away on her trumpet, just like Dizzy Gillespie or someone. So that's another reference to the resurrection, life to come. However, there they are. And here they be. So look at this. Remember, this is a family of the highest order of grandeur in that area. The Cavendishes, a family really on the rise. They've entered the aristocracy. They're now earls. Apparently, William had to pay £10,000 to James I to secure that title. But the elder brother Henry is depicted as a skeleton. The younger brother William as a gaunt corpse in a shroud, with a face that really does smack of the deathbed, the emaciation, the gauntness of illness. So these are grandees, and yet presented in such a scene of abasement. There's sort of echoes of the Earl of Salisbury at Hatfield, that remarkable monument by Maximilian Colt. This is a reminder of some of the ambiguities of image making in the early 17th century. A huge and impressive, imposing monument, but also a reminder of mortality, almost as though the intensity of that depiction of mortality gives you license to assert your worldly office. That's a duality that we're very familiar with from the double-decker transi tombs of the Middle Ages. And there we have a couple more images of the remains. And I think on the right, you can see that sort of foreshortened view of the Earl of Devonshire's cadaverous face. It's a remarkable piece of portrayal. Next, oh good, the Christmases. Number 5 is a monument in Norfolk at Southacre to Sir Edward and Lady Jane Barkham. And he, I believe, died in 1634, although it doesn't say so on the tomb, but that's my best guess. There's the church, and you can see where the place is. It's all between King's Lynn and Dereham, not so far from Walsingham. I remember a happy visit there a few years ago, and our destination was to come and see this monument, attributed to the Christmases, but really pretty securely so. Edward Barkham was Lord Mayor of London. He was a local boy who did extremely well in London. He was master of the Leather Sellers Company. He then became a baronet. He was the embodiment of a local boy made good. And when it came to a monument, this was commissioned from the Christmases. I think we can be really very, very sure it's by them. And interestingly, when he became Lord Mayor in 1621, the pageant master for the City of London was Garrett or Gerard Christmas, who was father of John and Matthias Christmas, the masons who made this monument. So there's another link there. And if you look at it, you can see we've got fairly conventional effigies, but here depicted in the robe of the Lord Mayor, with armor beneath, as befits his baronet status. Though remember, this man was a city merchant. At the back, we have an armorial achievement The inscription panel below is frustratingly blank, hence my confusion about the dates. We have a figure of Victory on the left, who's holding a sort of laurel in her hand. And on the right, we see our friend shrouded Death. Two very large and prominent winged hourglasses for the speed with which time hurtles past us. And below we see the fruit of their union, 3 daughters and 2 sons, and very exotic marbles. Have a look how elaborate and ostentatious the geological richness is for this monument. But in the middle at the bottom, in front of the fictive tomb chest, is a panel of utter desolation. It's what I call a charnel panel. Oops, before going on to that, sorry, that's an aerial view of their effigies. And there's a close-up of our friend Death. Now onto the charnel panel. Oh dear. On the left is the panel that we've just been looking at South Acre. And you can see how it belongs to a group of remarkable alabaster panels, which came from the Christmas workshop, which was in Cripplegate, i.e. underneath the site of today's Barbican. So the next time you're in that brutalist landscape, you can think of the Christmases whittling away their alabaster to create these wondrous fantasies of the distillation of death. These, of course, are offsetting the pomp of the effigy above, and they show not only death, but the breakdown and an abuse almost of mortal remains. These are just heaped up and put behind these feigned grills, these bars, just like in a charnel house. This was the subject of my PhD, or quite a lot of it. And you can see that there are other very similar charnel panels elsewhere. In the middle, we've got one at Clifton on the outskirts of Nottingham, to the first 3 wives of Sir Gervase Clifton, to Penelope, Frances and Mary. Thank you, Liz Blood, for the picture of that one. And over on the right, we have what has been misleadingly labeled Sir Tobert Parkhurst. He's called Robert, as well you could guess. And that's another one by the Christmases. And that church at Guildford actually has 2 charnel tombs. This one is rather hacked about and in a bit of a mess, but inside Holy Trinity Guildford is a tomb to an Archbishop of Canterbury, George Abbott, and he has a charnel image too. Here are some more. On the left, we see William Pitts at Stratfield Say. That's one of the later ones. He died in 1640. And the other 2 images are from Uxbridge, the outer London suburb, showing Leonora Bennett, who was, I think, Flemish originally, Vierendils, who died in 1638. So these are incredible carvings. And apparently when alabaster is quite fresh out of the ground, it's quite easy to carve. Someone's described it as having the texture of resembling hard soap. So this isn't a sort of brittle chip. This is almost more of a scooping technique. And that enables a high degree of undercutting to be achieved. And also observe the anatomical accuracy, or at least profound interest in the actual form of bones to create these very vivid images. So Edward Barkham, I've just chosen as one of the possessors of these charnel tombs, which I do think are absolutely terrific. Number 4, we're getting near the top now. This is at Canterbury Cathedral to Dean Charles Fotherby, a Grimsby-born man who died in 1619, having attained the high office of Dean of Canterbury Cathedral. And there that magnificent and glorious building is. On the right, I've circled where in the cathedral this monument is, what's now called the Dean's Chapel, here called the Chapel of the Virgin Mary. That's just to the north of the martyrdom where Thomas à Becket met his cruel end. And inside the Dean's Chapel, is a number of monuments to deans, but the one I've settled upon is this one. This is Dean Fotherby's memorial. As you can see, it's an alabaster chest, not perhaps particularly remarkable to that end, but what is very special and absolutely unheralded is the assemblage of bones stuck to the outside. Now, I'm pretty sure that Dean Fotherby, who was a learned person like his brother Martin rose to be Bishop of Salisbury. I think what's going on here is that Dean Fotherby wants his tomb to embody that well-known saying of Christ's, as reported in the 23rd chapter of the Gospel of St. Matthew, verses 27 to 28, and let me read them out. Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for ye are like unto whited sepulchres, which indeed appear beautiful outward, but are within full of dead men's bones, and of all uncleanness. Even so ye also outwardly appear righteous unto men, but within ye are full of hypocrisy and iniquity. So what I think we're looking at here is Dean Fotherby's desire to be remembered as a person of the utmost integrity, who was as worthy, as divine inside as he professed to be externally. And he uses the whited sepulchres image for the meaning of his monument, which I'm sure he would have created himself. We have no evidence for that, but I believe this like Dr. Dunn, thinking about your own monument is part of your preparation for your end. And you can imagine the masons scratching their head when they're told to create a chest covered in bones. None of them had done that before, I imagine. Here are two views at the end. The view on the right, which is the sort of south end, the west end, has a rib cage that always reminds me a bit of a toast rack. But not to worry, it's still a very powerful thing. It's been in the wars slightly. Some of the bones have come off. So the intricacy was a risky strategy in terms of endurance, but generally the monument survives pretty well. And interestingly, this tomb was a very early monument to be depicted in mezzo tint for a history of the cathedral. 1726, John Dart's book, The History and Antiquities of the Cathedral Church of Canterbury. And there you can see it on the left, but I have it hanging up just here. So I have this monument beside me every single day. And when you compare the print to the actual thing, you can see that the printmaker has actually reversed the monument. It's not easy perhaps to see, but take it from me. What's on the left of the print is on the right of the actual thing. So I think that's an extraordinarily powerful monument, very inventive, using the imagery of death as a way of stressing piety and, of course, to instruct others. But the monuments as a cue for inventiveness is one of the points I'd like to make here. And it's a reminder that this imagery of mortality can actually be really life-enhancing. These things are fascinating. Right, number three, top three now. We're going up to Burton Agnes, which, apart from anyone who lives in York or Yorkshire, is quite a long way away. Burton Agnes, Yorkshire's East Riding. You can see the little red dot on the sort of northeast coast of England. The house is amazing, and I can't wait to go there, only having been to the church in my time. So this is a very grand house, built in the first decade of the 17th century. Robert Smithson was involved here. There are incredible chimney pieces, and that black and white old image is a picture of the sort of triumph of death that actually is found in the overmantel of the drawing room. Now, how long it's been there, I'm not sure, because some things have been introduced into Burton Agnes. But let's just summarize by saying that the inhabitants of Burton Agnes clearly had some kind of interest in the imagery of mortality. And Sir Henry Griffith, who died in 1654, commissioned this monument that I think is devastating and desolate in its bleakness. At the top, we have fairly conventional heraldic achievements, and you can see the inscription on the backplate says, "This monument was erected in memory of Sir Henry Griffith, Baronet, and his two wives, the one, as appears by the arms, a Willoughby, and the other, a Bellingham." Now, I think it's slightly mean that they haven't even given the names of the wife. Let me make good. It's Margaret Willoughby and Dorothy Bellingham were his two wives. But it's just a reminder that sometimes we are so obsessed with the individual in today's society. For these people, the individual was often part of a lineage, part of a family. And that was an identity that meant a great deal. But the angels on the back plate hold up the inscription panel. Behind the curtains, you can see the ceiling of the recessed alcove with clouds and a cherub's head, again emblematic of the life to come. So there's a tiny chink of light in this otherwise very, very somber scene. But the somberness is very intense. The darkness is really deep, because instead of effigies, we have 3 black coffins. Coffins, the abstract replacement for the presence of the body. These rectangular abstract shapes contrasting with the seething organic depiction of bones underneath. So you've got double death here, if you like. The coffins that hold the bodies, that we're not going to let you see them, and then these charnel panels. This, I suspect, I'm pretty sure, is London work. Whether the mason responsible had ever worked with the Christmas workshop, who knows? Often specialist workmen would go from one workshop to another. We don't know who did this, but I think that combination of charnel panel and coffin is particularly bleak here. And that's why I've made it number 3. Oh, some coffins. This image is really for Julian Lytton, the coffin boffin par excellence. We see on the left the single coffin at Derby Cathedral, which is to Sarah Ulstrey, who died in 1630s, and her husband William, who died in 1655. And there's a sort of death's head, rather similar to the ones from the Marshall workshop, laurel crowned death's head above the coffin. And over on the right, another visit to a churchyard. That's at Malden in Essex, a rather lovely late Georgian Portland stone affair. And you can see the handles on the side of this coffin, as well as these sort of Sheraton-esque paterae that mark the side of it. So coffins on monuments, you can find them. Right, number 2, nearly there. This is, in many ways, I think, the most remarkable monument of the 17th century, and a tiny plug for church monuments. Mark did that very ably before. I just want to say that I actually had my maiden article in this, in the current edition, which is all about the dry bones of Sir John Denham. So if you want to know more about this monument, I have written it up. Egham. Now, Egham isn't perhaps the most exciting town in Surrey. It's near Runnymede, so it's an interesting place to visit. That's the church that was rebuilt just after Waterloo, about 1817. And it replaced quite a small medieval parish church. And the monument we're about to see used to be in the chancel of the medieval church. When you go there now, walk in and turn immediately right up the stairs to the gallery. And that window on the right-hand side at first floor level looks onto the monument I'm about to show you. Now look away if you're feeling squeamish, because this is heavy. There it is. I imagine lots of you know this, but it is quite extraordinary. We're pretty certain this is by William Wright of Charing Cross. Various reasons for that. And working downwards, what it depicts is a man arising out of his coffin. He's pushing up with his right hand and hailing the celestial vision above with a left hand. I suspect it was the size of the alabaster block that made that very sharp juncture between wrist and hand such an acute angle. This is a man called Sir John Denham, who was a judge, a very senior judge, who's known to history as one of the people who returned a verdict in the ship money case in the mid-1630s that was critical of the king. So quite a significant figure in his day. He's also well known because he was the father of another Sir John Denham, who's a bit better known. Sir John Denham, the poet, author of Cooper's Hill, and who ends up becoming Surveyor of the King's Works under Charles II, just before Christopher Wren gets the job. So here we have an 80-year-old judge. I'm convinced that it was the judge himself who came up with this scheme. He was quite pious. He's left some writings behind that talks about his preparation for death. And he's shown at the moment of the rising of the dead. You can see the angels blaring away on their sort of flugelhorn-like trumpets, and the inscriptions, which have no reference at all to him. All the inscriptions about looking to the world to come. The only identifiers here are heraldic, something that we've encountered before. If you look at the print on the left, you can see that there's a missing stage. Below the coffin was a stage that was inscribed Sic Transit Gloria Mundi, and what looks like a heap of bedclothes. Those were actually his lawyer's gowns. So those were his symbols of office that he'd cast off. He's spurning his worldly achievement. But have a look below. This is why I've made this number 2 in my top 10 macabre tombs countdown. Ex ossibus armati, furnished from bones. And you can see this, the surroundings of it are cracked. This is the moment when the last trumpet is sounded and the tombs will break open, releasing the dead. So we're looking at a fictive depiction of the moment of the rising of the dead, which is highly, highly unusual. And inside this charnel vault, you can see a mixture of fleshed people who are awake, sleeping people who have yet to arise, loose bones and skeletons. And some of the skeletons are clearly awake. The skeleton on the left is pushing the shroud off his head. Always reminds me of the Ray Harryhausen skeletons in Jason and the Argonauts, that bit. Denham had 2 wives, so we assume perhaps his second wife has got flesh on, and the first wife further back is yet to animate. It's quite a problem for the multiply married, how social arrangements were going to be sorted out. But God will work it out. Anyway, the carving here is quite remarkable. It's a virtuoso bit of skeletal carving. This has been damaged quite a lot. Lots of the ribs have been snapped off, which is a risk with ribs. Ribs are delicate things, but an amazing, wonderful thing. There's one other monument that combines a charnel panel with a resurrecting figure. This is this one at Stratton Strawless, surely one of the best names for any village, to Thomas Marsham, who died in 1630. Well, it says 38 on the monument, so I'm wrong in my inscription. We don't think this is by the Christmas Brothers, though it's sort of in their line of work. The trumping angels, the figure rising up below. Lacks to me some of the frisson of the Denham, but there's a rather splendid portrait of Thomas Marsham with his stubble. You see he's got sort of speckled chin and whiskers. Things happen when you're buried. Anyway, So that was number 2. That was Sir John Denham. Number 1, which is going to get my crown for the most macabre monument to share with you? Well, it's in Shoreditch, in St Leonard's Church, which was rebuilt in the 1730s by George Dance the Elder. You can see it's just above, quite near Old Street Roundabout, just above the city. And inside, our monument is actually in the gallery on the southeast part of the gallery. So you've got to climb up to go and have a look at it. But it is really worth doing so, because the most macabre monument, to my mind, looks like, it is to Elizabeth Benson, née Hunyadi, who died in 1710 at the age of 90. It's almost certainly carved by Francis Bird, very, very notable sculptor of late Georgian and late Stuart, early Georgian times. And Elizabeth Benson's monument looks like this. Shazam. Brief silence while it sinks in. Elizabeth Benson is a fascinating figure. She's the daughter of a Hungarian, or more precisely, a Transylvanian alchemist of Johannes Banfi Hunyadi, who had been born in Transylvania, who was an associate of the learned and mysterious Dr. Dee, the alchemist. Hunyadi, the father, was connected with Gresham's College, but had a hard time making a living and was unable to turn common matter into gold. His son, John, however, was a hugely successful merchant, and John Hunyadi did not marry. He left his fortune to his sister Elizabeth, and Elizabeth, God bless her, remarried at the age of 78, a much younger man, William Benson. And when she died, aged 90, Benson erected this monument, which is absolutely extraordinary. We think it's by Francis Bird, not only for reasons like the nature of the inscriptions, also because Francis Bird gave the epitaph to John Leneve, who included it in his Monumenta Anglicana, that collection of epitaphs published in several volumes, 1717 to 19. So we know that Bird had supplied the epitaph, which is a clue. One of the many interesting things about this monument is the fact that it is very closely based on an earlier design by Stefano della Bella, the Florentine artist. You can see on the right this etching, which comes from Nouvelle Invention de Cartouche, published in Paris in 1647. And this shows two malign and horrid skeletons ripping apart a tree. And you can see that they've got bits of skin on them, and they've got lank hair on their skulls, and they are putting their all into tearing this tree apart. Now, I know the leaves don't look much like oak leaves, but I'm just wondering whether this had some connection to do with the Della Rovere family, very powerful Italian family, because their Della Rovere is of the oaks, and their family badge is an oak tree. So I'm wondering whether this might have been possibly a funereal decoration for a premature death in the Della Rovere family. Anyway, the monument, the design, was borrowed by Francis Bird. Whether he came up with the concept or whether the Bensons did, we just don't know. But there you can see the skeletons ripping apart that oak tree, with very, very clearly depicted oak leaves over there. And a very splendid thing it is too. The carving is dramatic. It's a wonder that it survived. Now, I could have included this fellow, this very well-known fellow by Roubiliac in Westminster Abbey, but I've elected not to. He's very well known. Lots of people know about this chap. I think the Shoreditch one is much, much more powerful in some ways. Just the cruelty, the savagery of these skeletons in Shoreditch, absolutely remarkable. I particularly like the way the right-hand skeleton has lifted his leg right up to gain better purchase, to enable him to yank down his half of the tree, and see how he's really clenching his teeth to try and put his all into it. And that wonderful array of vertebrae. This is what I mean about these monuments being life enhancing, but the carving is engrossing. It really makes you look at these as physical forms. And it's a reminder that lots of the images that we've been looking at are, of course, being created at the time, essentially, of man's discovery of the workings of the human body. It's a remarkable time for anatomy and medical sciences. So there we have the tree being ripped apart. Remember that Elizabeth Benson was 90 when she died. So the idea that this is a sort of young tree being prematurely pulled apart is slightly open to qualification. But on the right, you can see a engraving by one of the saddlers showing death with an axe as lopping into the tree of life. What a cruel, cruel, cruel man he is. And so that was number one. I'm not going to recount the top 10. I hope that if you want to know more about this tomb, I did write it up actually in this book, Tributes to Jean-Michel Massin, who is my supervisor, and I did my PhD all those years ago. And yeah, so if you want to know more about that monument, you can find that in the chapter, and it's I commend it to you. Anyway, so that was my top 10. I'll leave you with one more image of the Bensons, and thank you very much indeed for listening. Very nice to share these things with you. Thanks very much.